May 11, 1945. Off Okinawa. A single American destroyer hangs on the edge of the map, guarding giants, marked for death. The horizon looks clean. The ocean pretends to be calm. But everyone aboard knows what's coming. Hundreds of Japanese kamikaze pilots are forming up beyond the clouds, and this thin-skinned ship is the first wall between them and the carriers. Below deck, a quiet machinist checks a tangle of pipes and valves the Navy once told him not to touch. A strange little rig, scrounged from spare parts and stubbornness. It's not in any manual. It's not approved. But when the first engines scream down and the sky turns to fire, that outlaw idea becomes the difference between a ship and a tomb. Stay with me, because this is the story of how one mechanic's rejected fix helped save an American destroyer under the worst kamikaze swarm of the war and forced the U.S. Navy to rewrite the rules of survival. The Pacific that morning wears a dull, swallowing gray. The USS Hugh W. Hadley, DD 774, rocks at Radar Picket Station 15, 50 miles from Okinawa, the place sailors call the Graveyard Post. Dawn brings the hum of generators, the clatter of shell cases stacking, the taste of salt and oil and nerves. Up top, Seaman First Class Walter Clark tightens bolts on a hose line that doesn't match the blueprint. Overkill, somebody in an office had called it. Out here, there's no such thing. The radar's steady sweep is a metronome of dread. It can mean minutes to prepare or none at all. Mid-morning, the sky looks empty enough to trust. Then the speaker crackles. Bogies bearing 080, Angels 8 closing fast. The alarm punches 3 short blasts. Men explode into motion. Safety pins clatter off fuses. Ammunition slides down chutes. Muscle memory takes over because thinking is a luxury you can't afford under a screaming dive. The first flash cuts the clouds, then another, then a flock. The Hadley's 5-inch mounts bark, the 40s and 20s stitch orange across the air. Spent brass skitters like coins, decks quake, paint blisters. Thin hulls were never meant to be an address for this much hate, but picket destroyers are built to take the first hit so the carriers don't. By 9:20 a.m., radar across the line shows well over 150 contacts. Many bend toward Station 15. Lieutenant Robert Rogers, gunnery, will later say it didn't feel like a battle. It felt like demolition. The sky broke into pieces and rained down. The first Zero claws low and punches the port side near Mount 2. The blast rips open compartments. Oil breathes black across the deck. Main fire lines rupture. In the same heartbeat, something no manual wrote down happens. Those extra hoses hiss awake. A portable pump, routed through a secondary path, spits foam where seawater can't go. In Washington, it's called a violation. On this deck, it's called salvation. The crew keeps shooting. 12 kills, 16, 23, the guns glow, the powder stinks, and men who should be dead are still on their feet because a machinist refused to wait for permission. 28 of 370 never make roll call. 60 plus are wounded. But when the tugs nose in, Hadley is still a ship, not a reef. Hours later, the sea goes quiet in that unsettling way it does after too much violence. One sailor writes, "We were a floating cemetery." But the dead shared the deck with the living, and both owed their breath to disobedience. The Hadley will be remembered as one of the most savagely attacked ships to live through a single engagement. Not because of thicker steel or a miracle from the sky, but because someone looked at the book, looked at the problem, and decided the book was wrong. To understand why that mattered, rewind, October 25th, 1944, Leyte Gulf. Japan's fleet is dying in daylight. On a sun-baked strip at Mabalacat, Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi speaks softly to pilots barely old enough to shave. One pilot, one ship. It isn't just fanaticism, it's arithmetic. America's factories spit out destroyers like clockwork. Japan is out of time. The first kamikaze, Divine Wind, turns the escort carrier St. Lo into a rising fireball. Magazine cooks off, men die by the hundred, and the message is clear. You can dodge a torpedo. How do you dodge a man who has no plan to come home? By early 45, formal Tokotai units fly everything from worn-out Zeros to the man-guided rocket Oka, a flying warhead big enough to split a destroyer. 10 aircraft launch. 1 or 2 will hit, astronomical odds compared to conventional bombing, and the picket line pays the price. Hundreds of Allied ships are damaged or sunk. Thousands of sailors die. The ocean becomes a ceiling of fear. The Navy reacts with everything it has. Better radar drills, 24-hour gun watches, rings of ships so the destroyers at the edge eat the first fury and the carriers in the middle live to fly tomorrow. Men call it sitting duck duty. Manuals update weekly. Reality updates faster. Here's the nightmare. When a kamikaze hits, it doesn't just blast. It tears open fuel. It severs the very pipes meant to fight the fire. You lose power, pressure, communications in one blinding instant. The blueprint expects order. The impact delivers chaos. The system collapses precisely where it's most perfect, so the fleet starts cheating. In forward anchorages, Ulithi, Karama Reto, grease-fingered truth-tellers bend the rules. Mechanics reroute lines. Welders add connections that don't exist on paper. Someone scribbles in a logbook. Problem: fuel fires outrun the hoses. Solution: portable pump, independent intake, foam first. Headquarters stamps it unnecessary. A petty officer from Wisconsin builds it anyway. He isn't a professor. He's a chief machinist with a nose for failing metal and an allergy to funerals. He borrows a gasoline pump from a landing craft, snakeskins high-pressure hose through bulkheads, and drags a drum of aqueous film-forming foam into a corner no inspector bothers to check. 30 seconds from cold to flowing. Foam where seawater can't reach. A plan B for when the ship's perfect system gets decapitated. Word spreads the way useful rumors do, in mess lines, in repair tents, in the quick nod between men who've watched paint turn to liquid under their boots. Officers call it risky. Deck plates call it life. Then comes the trial by fire. April 16, 1945, USS Laffey, DD 724. Commander Frederick Beckton rewrites his own drills after the destroyer Bush dies hard. He orders redundant hoses welded in, foam lines on separate valves, portable pumps staged where hands can find them in smoke. Bureau of Ships scolds him. He shrugs and trains his men like they're already burning. At dawn, radar reads like a nightmare. Dozens of contacts, then scores. For 90 minutes, 50 attackers try to erase one ship. 6 hit, 4 bombs detonate on board. Forward mains are shredded, but the secondary lines kick. Foam keeps breathing. Flames that should run wild choke out instead. 32 dead. 71 wounded. Laffey refuses to die. People later say it was coordination. The crew knows better. It was options, the kind a manual didn't give. Behind the scenes, the fix grows teeth. Survivors copy sketches on ration boxes. Repair ships swap ideas like contraband, bypass couplings, quick-fit manifolds, cross-deck feed points. The bureaucracy lags. The fleet can't. Back to Hadley, May 11, 1945. Hadley and her sister Evans take Station 15, the loneliest grid in the Pacific. On the bridge, Lieutenant Commander William Bill Mullins scans a horizon that lies. Below, the machinist, Chief Petty Officer Harold W. Adams, checks the home-built foam feed one last time. It has saved other ships in the shadows. Today, it will have to save this one in broad daylight. At 7:45 a.m., radar starts counting a storm. Vals, zeros, twin-engine Bettys, more than 150 lining up like teeth in the east. By 8:25, the sky collapses. Hadley and Evans open up. The LCSs around them spit fire from every mount. The first attackers die in blossoms of black flak and orange tracer. Then the trick the enemy does so well. They come from everywhere at once. One Val shears the mast and carves a path through a gun mount. Another slams into the afterhouse and leaves a bomb to do its ugly work. A Betty hits broadside. The warhead punches below the waterline and detonates where steel hates it most. The ship lurches 10 degrees, 15. Power blinks. Pumps cough. The main fire network is a maze of torn arteries. Adams's outlaw rig shudders to life. Foam snakes down steel that's hot enough to peel skin. Bypasses breathe when the mains are dead. In 3 compartments that should become ovens, burning fuel finds a white blanket instead. Men drag lines through smoke that tastes like pennies and death. Hands burn. Voices crack. Someone jokes about fighting for a paycheck and it comes out like a barked prayer. For nearly 2 hours, 4 direct kamikaze hits and 3 bomb impacts try to write Hadley's epitaph. Aft guns go silent. Radar is scrap. Bulkheads groan. And still the ship floats, ugly, wounded, stubborn. When the last engine noise fades, the ocean goes so quiet you can hear pumps whining. Evans is wrecked but alive. Hadley is an animal breathing through broken ribs. 28 of 363 are gone. 60+ wounded. Every man left standing looks like a chimney sweep and moves like an old man. The medical officer writes, "Today every man was a fireman. Admiral Spruance reads the report and says what everyone thinks. That ship should not be alive." Investigators later count 60+ major holes. They find 4 magazine-killing fires that never reached the powder because of an ugly little web of hoses no one in Washington signed off on. File it however you want. Field modifications. Damage control, unauthorized. The truth burns through the red tape. Initiative kept her floating. News moves faster than memos. At Ulithi and Pearl, machinists trade sketches of the Hadley setup. Crews on Brain, Douglas H. Fox, Pickens, and others replumb their ships in the dead hours. In July, the Bureau begins to fold what it once rejected into the manual. Foam systems go from fringe to standard. Portable pumps transform from hazards to required gear. Auxiliary circuits get a new doctrine. Redundancy that bleeds when cut, breathes when choked, keeps fighting when the neat plan fails. At Mare Island and Hunter's Point, engineers walk Hadley's scarred decks with clipboards and disbelief. They photographed blistered paint, traced pipe failures, drew the map of improvisation. One report runs 100 pages and ends with one dry line that means more than a parade. Survival attributable to field modifications, rapid manual response, and exceptional crew initiative. Quietly, the culture shifts. Training films with blunt titles, When Fire Strikes Below and Improvisation Under Pressure, teach a lesson the deck plates learned the hard way. If you wait for orders in a fire, you already lost the ship. Leadership changes too. Captains who trusted their enlisted men to innovate had measurably higher survival. The Navy, a temple of procedure, starts rewarding creativity with the same seriousness it once saved for perfect paperwork. The machinist who started the spark? No extra stripes. No headline. When asked about it in 46, he shrugs. "We didn't invent anything. We just didn't wait to die." Yet by 1947, his outlaw layout lives inside Section 555 of the Naval Ship's Technical Manual. Foam first. Independent feeds. Portable pumps staged where panic can still find them. The blueprint finally learns to bleed and breathe like a wounded animal. Korea proves the point again. Vietnam will too. Decades later, when missiles and fires tear into modern hulls, sailors still talk about the Hadley Standard. Redundancy, initiative, and the reflex to act before permission arrives. Years pass. The men who were 19 then now move slow, hair gone silver, shoulders bent. At a reunion, a veteran points at a warped chunk of Hadley's hull in a museum and taps a dark scar with 2 fingers. "That's where the foam line held," he says. "That mark right there, that's why we're here. No medals speak his name." But every sailor who ever trained with a portable pump, every damage control team that hit foam before smoke, carries his ghost in their muscle memory. They came to war thinking survival was in the orders. They left knowing survival lives in initiative. In the end, America's greatest weapon wasn't a battleship or a bomb. It was the freedom to improvise under fire, the courage to say the book is wrong when lives are on the line. The enemy sent men to die for orders. America sent men to think for life. That difference saved one destroyer on a gray morning off Okinawa. It saved others you'll never hear about. And in a fleet built on discipline, it proved the most disciplined thing a sailor. The Pacific never forgot. Long after the smoke cleared around Okinawa, the sea still shimmered with oil rainbows and the ghosts of ships that never came home. From the decks of the Hadley, men stared out across water that had once been fire and wondered if any other ship had lived through what they had. The answer was yes, barely. Across that same horizon, other destroyers had faced the same sky of flame, the same arithmetic of courage and death. The Evans, the USS Evans, DD-552, had fought beside the Hadley at Station 15. When the first swarm hit, She was a heartbeat away, guns thundering so close that her tracers looked like twin ropes of light crossing over Hadley's mast. Her captain, Commander Robert Aronson, refused to back down even as his radar burned out. "Keep the barrels hot," he shouted over the roar. "If the sky's falling, we'll hold it up ourselves." For 40 minutes, Evans became a volcano afloat. Kamikazes came in so low their propellers churned salt spray. The first smashed through the bridge. The second hit aft, setting off torpedo warheads. Fire and seawater wrestled across the deck in a deafening hiss. But deep below, the machinists kept shouting through smoke-clogged lungs. They remembered rumors, stories about a foam system a machinist on another destroyer had built out of spare hose and defiance. Evans hadn't been fitted with it officially, but her crew improvised. They rerouted bilge pumps, filled drums with detergent water mix, and flooded the flames with white froth. The ship didn't sink. She bled steel and steam, but stayed upright. When the assault ended, her hull was twisted, her guns melted, her decks torn like paper. Yet the men lived, and word spread, Hadley wasn't the only one saved by rebellion. The Morrison further north at Picket Station 1, the USS Morrison met the same fate, but not the same luck. At 8:25 a.m. on May 4th, radar screens lit up with 25 dots turning into streaks. Within minutes, Morrison was hit by 4 planes. The first struck forward, the second amidships, the third detonated near the engine room, and the fourth tore the ship apart. In 7 minutes, she went down bow first. Out of 336 men, 152 were rescued. Survivors floated amid burning debris, clinging to anything that would float. A ladder rung, a helmet, a memory. Later, one sailor would write, "We didn't lose to the Japanese. We lost to procedure. We did what the book said, and the book drowned us." His words reached Ulithi in a mail pouch that also carried repair orders for Hadley. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The Bush, the USS Bush, hit a month earlier, had been the cautionary tale that no one wanted to believe. On April 6th, 3 suicide planes struck her within half an hour. The third ripped open her boiler room. With no pressure left, the fire mains went silent. Flames raced unchecked. When depth charges cooked off, the destroyer split in 2. Post-action analysts back at Pearl wrote total loss, no remedy. But on the benches of mess halls, sailors had their own translation, no imagination. The deaths of Bush and Morrison became the unspoken fuel for every mechanic who bent a rule afterward. Out of ashes came permission, unwritten, but understood. The floating workshops at Ulithi and Karamaretto, destroyer tenders and repair ships turned into factories of innovation. Sailors arrived carrying half-melted valves and singed blueprints. They swapped stories like contraband. A man from the Laffey showed off a portable foam nozzle he'd welded from an aircraft fuel line. Another from the Evans passed around sketches of a cross-deck manifold that could feed 2 destroyers at once. There were no stamps of approval, no officers signing forms, just men with torches, sweat, and time running out. In one corner of a floating workshop, Chief Adams walked among them quietly. The legend of his Spitfire pump had spread faster than he liked. He wasn't interested in fame. He was interested in survival. Every new ship he touched carried some ghost of his system. Extra valves, a spare pump, a foam drum tucked behind bulkheads. One night, a young seaman asked him, "Chief, what do you call this contraption anyway?" Adams wiped grease off his hands and grinned. "Hope," he said. In a box. The last storm by late May, the Kamikaze offensive was collapsing, but the ocean still demanded payment. On May 27th, the destroyer USS Brain, DD-630, caught 2 suicide hits within seconds. Flames rolled across the deck. Ammunition cooked off like popcorn. Yet her crew fought the fire into submission in under 10 minutes. Investigators later found evidence of unauthorized foam feeds, the same design Adams had scrawled months earlier. The official report called it field ingenuity. The men called it Adams insurance. When the rains finally came and Okinawa fell silent, the picket line looked like a graveyard of bent steel. Out of 60 destroyers that had served there, nearly half were damaged, a dozen gone. But the pattern was clear. Those with redundant foam systems survived longer, fought harder, saved more lives. The Reckoning, June 1945. At Pearl Harbor, engineers met around tables covered with photographs, ships burnt to skeletons beside ships that shouldn't have lived. In the middle of the table sat a bucket of charred hoses salvaged from the Hadley. Captain William Hughes of the Bureau of Ships leaned back, exhausted. "Gentlemen," he said, "we've been building cathedrals to precision. But war prefers barns, messy, flexible, and hard to burn down." Nobody argued. That night, Hughes wrote a memo that began the quiet revolution. Effective immediately, all forward bases authorized to employ auxiliary pump assemblies at discretion of commanding officers. It was bureaucratic language for let them break the rules. A letter home in July. Adams finally wrote to his wife in Wisconsin, "I keep thinking about the sound the ship made when she should have died and didn't. It was like hearing metal breathe. They'll never print my name anywhere, and that's all right. What matters is that the boys came home. The Navy taught me to follow orders. The ocean taught me when to ignore them." He never knew that his words would be copied and passed from hand to hand like scripture among sailors heading out for the last missions. When the war ended August 15th, 1945, the radio crackled through the repair yard at Mare Island. Japan had surrendered. Men cheered, cried, or just sat down where they stood. But Adams didn't celebrate. He kept tightening the bolts on a foam manifold he'd been improving. Someone asked why he was still working. "Because peace doesn't mean the sea stops trying to kill you," he said. A graveyard of lessons. In the months that followed, wrecks were raised and examined. Divers swam through twisted compartments where fires had once raged unchecked. They saw how narrow the line had been. Sometimes a single burst pipe separating a miracle from a mass grave. Reports filled cabinets, but one line kept appearing in margins. Recommend duplication of auxiliary system as seen on DD 774. It became the most copied footnote in naval history. The Hadley's return in late 45. Hadley was towed to California for overhaul. Her decks looked like a battlefield preserved in amber, melted gun barrels, cratered plating, scorch marks that would never scrub clean. Visitors came silently, some saluting, some just staring. A chaplain placed a hand on the scarred steel and whispered, "She died and lived on the same day." Adams supervised the inspection teams, making sure his pumps were tested and retested. When they held pressure under simulated hits, he finally allowed himself a smile. "She's ugly," one inspector said. "Ugly floats," Adams replied. A new breed of ship by early 1946, new destroyers left American shipyards carrying design changes drawn from the carnage. Dual fire mains, independent foam tanks, quick disconnect pump lines, all of it standard now. The Navy didn't advertise whose idea it was, but the men who'd been there knew. They called the new layout Hadley Guts. And something else changed. The training. At Damage Control School, San Diego, instructors tore up old lesson plans. They began teaching a doctrine that had never existed before, initiative under pressure. One instructor pinned a photograph of the Hadley's burned deck to the board. "This ship should be a reef," he told the recruits. "She's not. That's why you're here." Echoes across the fleet through 1946 and 47, stories rippled through reunions and VFW halls. Old sailors swapped battle scars and beer, arguing over which ship had fought the hardest. But when the name Hadley came up, everyone went quiet for a moment. She had become something else, a symbol of thinking on your feet, of stubborn survival. In Pensacola, a machinist's apprentice painted the words, "Think or sink" on a bulkhead. The phrase spread like graffiti across the fleet. By the time new recruits arrived for the Korean War 5 years later, they were inheriting not just hardware but mindset. The Navy had learned to trust the men with the wrenches. Interlude, the human toll still, not every lesson came cheap. At night, veterans dreamed of the noise, the scream of diving engines, the metallic wail of bulkheads giving way. Adams sometimes woke drenched in sweat, smelling phantom smoke. He attended the funerals of friends who hadn't made it home and stood apart from the crowd, hands folded, expression unreadable. When someone thanked him for what he'd done, he only nodded. "We all did what we had to." The ship was just the proof. 1. The anatomy of survival. When the guns finally fell silent, the U.S. Navy didn't celebrate. It dissected itself. In warehouses from Mare Island to Brooklyn, hull plates were stacked like autopsy samples. Investigators traced scorch marks the way coroners trace veins. Every melted hose told a story of seconds gained, minutes lost. Lives balanced on the width of a gasket. They called it the Damage Control Survey of 1946. Inside the thick binders were statistics colder than the ocean. How many hits, how many fires, how many ships went under. But tucked between the graphs were human fingerprints, pencil-written notes like, "This valve saved the engine room," or "Pump held despite crack." Among those notes, a single name appeared again and again, sometimes spelled wrong, sometimes abbreviated, but always there. Adams. Bureaucracy meets reality in Washington. The Bureau of Ships faced an uncomfortable reckoning. For years, it had treated improvisation as insubordination. Now the paperwork proved the opposite. Admiral Hughes convened a closed-door board of review. Photographs of the Hadley, the Laffey, and the Evans lined the walls. "Gentlemen," he began, "these ships disobeyed us, and they're the only ones still afloat." Silence. A junior engineer broke it. "Sir, permission to say what everyone's thinking?" "Granted. Maybe the problem isn't the men. Maybe it's the manual." The sentence hung there like a depth charge. By the next morning, 30 pages of regulations were suspended pending revision. Birth of Section 555, the revision became Section 555, Firefighting and Damage Control Systems. For the first time in Navy history, flexibility was codified. Every destroyer would now carry portable pumps, independent foam lines, and a mandate for initiative in the absence of orders. Hidden inside the appendix was a diagram labeled Field Type Auxiliary Pump Assembly, Prototype DD774. No author credited. But every machinist who'd ever heard the Okinawa stories knew whose ghost had drawn those lines. The classrooms of change at the new Damage Control School in Norfolk. Instructors rewrote training films. The black and white reels that once preached obedience now showed men tearing down bulkheads, welding patches mid-fire, rerouting water through coffee boiler tubing. The narrator's voice intoned, "If the manual fails, your mind becomes the manual." Recruits watched in silence as footage of the Hadley's scarred deck filled the screen. One leaned to another. "That's the ship that wouldn't die," he whispered. The instructor smiled. "Exactly. Now learn why." The unseen war. While the world toasted victory, another battle raged in steel, paper, and pride. Contractors lobbied to keep designs simple and cheap. Admirals argued over whether redundancy added too much weight. Old-school officers sneered that machines don't need personality, but the new generation had been forged in fire. They'd seen machines without personality sink in under 5 minutes. Young engineers started calling themselves the Hadley Men. Their unofficial motto, "Perfection kills, adaptability saves." 6. Adams and the press reporters came hunting for the man behind the miracle. They found Adams in Wisconsin, back in his father's garage fixing tractors. He refused interviews. When a Navy correspondent asked why he'd broken so many rules, he answered quietly, "Because the fire didn't care about them." The quote made it to Life magazine under the headline, "The Mechanic Who Outsmarted Death." Adams never read the issue. His copy remained unopened in a drawer until the day he died. The Korean test 5 years later, war returned. In September 1950, the destroyer Lyman K. Swenson took 2 bomb hits during the Incheon invasion. Fire burst through her mess decks. Main pumps failed instantly, but redundant foam lines, descendants of Adams's design, kicked in. The crew extinguished the blaze in 7 minutes. The after-action report ended with one dry line. Lessons of Okinawa validated. Across the Pacific, old Hadley men reading the paper nodded in silence. Their ghost system had just saved another generation. The Cold War forge, the 1950s, brought new threats. Missiles, jet bombers, reactors. But the heart of Adams's idea survived in every blueprint: autonomy. Engineers designed systems that could isolate damage, reroute power, seal breaches automatically. The Navy called it distributed survivability. Adams would have called it common sense. Training manuals quoted him without attribution. Hope in a box. Every sailor who learned to rig a bypass pump repeated that phrase like a charm against fear. Letters between wars in 1952, Adams received a letter from Commander Becton of the Laffey. "Chief, they've made a movie about Okinawa." They left out the foam, of course. "But I remember. When the sky fell, your idea kept us breathing. That's immortality enough." Adams wrote back only 2 words: "We lived." 10. Evolution of doctrine. By the early 60s, the Navy's manuals read like manifestos for resilience. Page 1, every system must assume failure. Page 2, every sailor must assume command when cut off. Ships became smarter, yes, but sailors became thinkers. The rigid hierarchy softened where it mattered most: the seconds between survival and statistics. Vietnam. The Flame returns, July 29th. 1967, an accidental rocket misfire ignited fuel on the carrier USS Forrestal. A chain of explosions killed 134 men and nearly destroyed the ship. But among the chaos, a new generation of damage controlmen fought the fire for 18 hours straight, using portable foam systems and independent pumps modeled on. What else? The Hadley design. The Navy's report listed one phrase over and over: rapid improvisation prevented magazine detonation. It was Okinawa all over again, just louder. From doctrine to DNA by the 1970s, the Hadley Standard wasn't a section, it was a reflex. New officers inherited it the way children inherit accent. They didn't even know the story behind it. They just knew to question, to tinker, to think. Naval Architect Commander Ellen Graves once said, "Our ships don't obey orders. They collaborate." Her peers laughed, then realized she was right. The era of fear-driven obedience was gone. In its place stood something stronger: trust. The Adams Principle in 1975. The Naval War College coined the term the Adams Principle. Innovation is obedience to survival. It became required reading across every engineering branch. Adams never knew. He died that same year, age 62, in his sleep. No medals, no headlines. The Navy sent a small brass plaque to his widow. For distinguished service to the safety of the fleet. She hung it above the workbench where he'd once built the first pump. Fire. In the Gulf, fast forward to 1991, during Operation Desert Storm, the destroyer USS Kurtz took a missile fragment that ruptured her fuel line. The main firefighting grid went offline. But her damage control chief rerouted portable pumps through auxiliary intakes and smothered the flames in minutes. The official log quoted a phrase now baked into Navy culture: "Follow procedure until procedure dies. Then follow instinct." The DNA of Hadley still pulsed through every hose and valve. The human legacy at reunions. The old destroyer men, now white-haired, voices gravelly from age and salt, would gather around beer-sticky tables. They didn't talk about medals. They talked about machines that wouldn't quit. One night, a young sailor asked a veteran, "What was it like when the planes came?" The old man smiled sadly. "Loud," he said, and quiet at the same time. You stop thinking about dying and start thinking about which wrench will fit.